Hello. That was a fast transition. Welcome to another exciting episode of Dr. K's Psychobabble, our continued exploration in the world of intelligence. And we've arrived at actually the original question that was posed to me by my colleague was for me to do a series on multiple intelligence. And so here we go. I'm going to introduce to you two theories. The first one is in this video, and that's Robert Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence. And in the next and probably final episode on intelligence, we'll look at Howard Gardner's famous multiple intelligence theory. So let's take a look and get to know Robert Sternberg a little bit. Now, Robert Sternberg, very, very prolific guy. He is currently professor of human development at Cornell University. Here, we'll give a little plug for Cornell. He is interested in the topics of intelligence, wisdom, creativity, love, and hate. He has 13 honorary degrees, along with his regular earned PhD and whatnot, and over 1,500 publications, be they academic articles or books. Now, interestingly enough, several years ago, I attended a conference of the Association of American Colleges and Universities as part of my work in assessment. And lo and behold, the keynote address, I didn't even know it, was Robert Sternberg. And so I was extremely excited about this because I've been talking about Dr. Sternberg's work in my classes for over 20 years, at least now. Then it was probably 15 years I've been talking about him. And I was really interested in hearing him speak and what he was going to speak about in the context of assessment. And lo and behold, I'm there walking along the upper mezzanine on my way to my seat, and there he is. And I walked up to him, and I was all starstruck. It was kind of silly. Got to meet him, got to shake his hand. Great guy, very gracious, very gentle human being. Just some characteristics, and it just drove home why I really think this guy's theory is so cool. I really like his work. He's one of my rock stars that I look at, in terms of people that I've really enjoyed their writings and whatnot. And it's just really nice to be able to talk about his work and actually to have met him. And his keynote was funny. It was relevant. He has this thing, he gets picked on a little bit because he has the triarchic theory of intelligence, and then he has the triarchic theory of love, and what's with the triangles there. And he is very open about that kind of discussion, taking that on. And it was very, very, very entertaining and very cool presentation. But off we go. Let's talk about Robert Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence. Now, to introduce this, let's use one of his triangles. Here we have a graphic representation of the three kinds of intelligences. And this sort of kinds is, that's really more of Howard Gardner's kinds of intelligence. This is sort of a mix of talent, raw, unabashed talent in a particular way, but also application and how we use intelligence. And this is why I really think that there is a very, as is one of these intelligence, pragmatic use to this particular theory. It's my current internal representation of intelligence when I think of the term intelligence. And so let's take a look at each one of these here. Up at the top, we have analytical intelligence, and the little instructions here say mental steps or components used to solve problems. This aspect of intelligence very much builds on the notion of traditional IQ. This is where it rests. I mean, the great thing about the field of psychology, we don't really throw anything out. We just build on it. And so there's, as I've been saying in all of these lectures, there's really nothing wrong with the traditional view, even of G, you know, the single factor, that IQ is still a relevant component for making certain kinds of decisions here. And it's a part of this theory, and we're going to see it gets broken up a little bit in Howard Gardner's theory, but it's still there. The intelligence that we know of as IQ and the kind of skill set that we need to engage in and be successful with academic pursuits, still a part of the equation. But he comes along and he decides he's going to add a couple others. That through his research, he found that there is actually a separate sort of application of these kinds of things, and that is in creativity. Now, separating creativity from the analytical component of intelligence, this is when we have the ability, as it says on the chart here, the use of experience in ways that foster insight. It is new and unique combinations of ideas, concepts, solutions, whatnot. The individual portrays a unique ability to come up with things that are new, at least new to them, new to the field in which that they're working in. And I think just looking at these two, I can imagine that you are aware of individuals who are very quote-unquote book smart, high IQ, they do well in the school, writing papers, answering quizzes, taking tests, really not a big deal for those individuals, very high intelligence, very high IQ. And then you have this sort of individuals that are creative, and they may or may not share the same level of IQ. Sometimes they do. Some people can be high on all of these. And so people who are creative are the individuals that might not get the right answer. And this is where I see it. Let's say you have a multiple choice question. And I see this sort of dichotomy of the analytical thinker and the creative thinker manifesting in the way individuals might approach a multiple choice question. Now, if you've written a good multiple choice question, there should be the right answer. There should be something that is perfectly logically the right answer, but is not the right answer. And then there's one or two distractors, maybe even a silly answer. And I have seen individuals approach a multiple choice question, and the analytical thinkers, they're that's not right, B is not right, C is not right, must be A. And that just sort of very distinct process. And in multiple choice questions, that's really what we're looking for. Multiple choice questions measure discernment, the ability to say this are wrong, so the last one that's left standing is the right answer, deductive reasoning. That's what multiple choice questions are all about. Those poor creative people who can come up with a way to explain why every single answer is potentially right. Because they can see, they add information, they do what if this, under these circumstances, particularly those answers that are close, but they're meant to kind of trip you up and make that distinction in the question, in the assessment that we call the multiple choice question. We're discerning between the operate within this box of information that we call the prompt and choose the one best answer. Be exclusive. Creative thinkers are inclusive, and these are not good and bad. These are equal parts of the application of intelligence. So creative individuals often will run into trouble with the multiple choice because, well, I think both are correct, that kind of conclusion. And I've certainly had lots of discussions with my students along that line. Now, interestingly, the individual who is creative may struggle on the multiple choice quiz, just looking at the application of this in academics. But they may excel when they're given an open-ended question, like explain the relationship between this and that. And you see the creativity come out, where the individual who's very analytical, depending on how creative they are and how good of a writer they are, they may go, okay, how do I then explain this in my own words and things like that? So different challenges for different people in terms of their application of analytical intelligence and creative intelligence. Now, the third one that Sternberg brings to us is actually practical intelligence. And I used the word practical to describe this whole theory just a moment ago. So I think that this is probably one of my favorites in terms of what Sternberg has added to our understanding of intelligence. And this has to do with culture, and it's specific, and it's contextual. Now, what this means, early on in my career of psychology, I took a course on, it was a course on intelligence, but it was really, really much more a course on testing, test construction, essentially psychometrics. And one of the things that I got exposed to was an intelligence test that had been constructed by a graduate student in Appalachia. This is in, along the eastern seaboard, the mountain folk, and essentially designed an intelligence test that was culture specific to that particular environment. Now, the funny thing about this was, here we are in a classroom and we're going to take this intelligence test of people from Appalachia, and we were all lined up for special ed after that. We were not doing well on this. If we were living there, we'd be asking the expertise that was contextual to the language, cultural norms, how to survive, what to eat, what not to eat, how to prepare what you want to eat so you can eat it and won't kill you. These kinds of things. It's folk knowledge. And this test was used to describe essentially what Sternberg's talking about here. It's this contextual intelligence. It's this, because of the situation and your knowledge of that particular set of information, you have a very high contextual intelligence. People who are experts at something, let's say you meet a person who's an expert nurse, or you meet a person who's an expert accountant, and they have, for one thing, they probably, if they've risen up to these echelons in our society, they probably have all three of these. They did well in school. They have very concrete, practical knowledge about how they do the thing that they do, and they're probably pretty creative. They've run into situations where they've had to adapt. And those individuals come across us as the individuals who we think are intelligent. So we have our model here. We have analytical intelligence, traditional IQ. We have creative intelligence, which has to do with the creation of things new combinations, new problem solving. And then we have culture-specific and context-specific applications for practical intelligence. Now, this model now gives us an understanding of intelligence that moves us away from that singular factor, about what is somebody that is intelligent, how do we discern that from someone who's not? And we see this is way more inclusive. We have lots more people that we can put into our intelligent category because they possess different kinds of skills and whatnot related to their functioning. it's also a lot more like what we think when we normally think about people who are intelligent. And I do this activity in my class sometimes when we're talking about intelligence, and I'll ask people to come up, I think I might have mentioned this story earlier, to come up with who's the most intelligent person that you know. And it's interesting because in the context of where I teach, there is not a plethora of individuals where academic education is widespread. We have lots of first generation students, people who they're the first ones to come to college. So there's not a wide collection of individuals that would have that kind of traditional perception of high IQ, but lots of individuals define the individual in their life who they think is the most intelligent, has either practical or creative intelligence. And I want to tell you my favorite story. My favorite story is an individual who raised their hand when I asked, who's the most intelligent person you know, and they said, I'm going to make this part up. My Uncle Stan. My Uncle Stan. I was like, okay, tell me about Stan. What's going on? What makes him the most intelligent person that you know? He said, because he's a national champion in freestyle skitter driving. Now, I have to tell you, I feel I'm kind of worldly, and I've, done a bit of traveling. I listen to people a lot. I had never heard of freestyle skitter driving, let alone that there was competitions around this, let alone that there was national champions and international championships that are being held on this. But lo and behold, us teachers end up learning a lot more than students most of the time. So she tells me the story of her uncle who participates in these national and sometimes international events, exhibiting his prowess with being able to make skitters do what he wants. Now, if you're not familiar with skitters, skitters are these very powerful, very large, tired, kind of multi-use vehicles that we often see associated with wood harvesting or anything that's sort of going on in the woods where you have to kind of get into nooks and crannies and have the power to haul things out. Now, apparently he has the ability to make this thing get up on two wheels, move it around, to pivot around, make it land right on targets, to move around cones that you wouldn't even think that this thing would be able to. Well, apparently this is all competitive. Now, let's look at this through the lens of Sternberg's intelligences, because truly she did capture a very important intelligence, very contextual. Meaning, this has to do with the skill set of skitter driving related to, he was a skitter driver and he had lots of experience and he was able to do that in the context of using that particular machine. I would imagine we're also talking about some creativity. Maybe he's able to see, how can I inject hydraulics into one part of this machine that will cause something to happen on the other part of the machine that is not necessarily the normal function of those particular parts of the machine, but they see it as a solution to a particular problem. Hence the freestyle component of this, to be able to take this machine and make it do things that it wasn't intended on doing. So I think this is a very accurate capture of a person who's high on those two intelligence. For all I know, he's high on the third one too. We never talked about it. But that individual in my class recognized that individual's intelligence in those two areas and picked what we might consider a non-traditional person as the most intelligent person that they knew. So further advantages of this particular approach: adult learners. Now, I'm in the field of adult learning. I teach in a college, and the vast majority of individuals that I teach, with the exception of some homeschool kids and some high school kids that sometimes come into my class, I'm teaching adults. Adults who are coming to school are different than individuals, in general, are different than individuals who are exploring career in there or exploring education, just getting smarter for maybe an undefined career in the future that we might see in some younger age college students. Again, I'm being very generalist here just to make my point. I have lots of individuals that are not only interested in learning about psychology, let's say the academic, can you cite the theories, can you write in APA style, can you do all of these things that I include in my classes, but they might also be, how can I use this? What's the pragmatic way? And teaching adults puts upon the shoulders of adult teachers to sometimes create that bridge between the intelligences that are represented in IQ and the intelligence that are represented in context. So if I'm teaching about intelligence in my class, a nurse or a future nurse may ask, why is this relevant? When is this relevant for me? A line worker may ask me, when is this relevant to me? A person who's in business may ask me, when is this relevant? And depending on the topic, I am sometimes able to help bridge that and sometimes not. The other thing that happens with adult learners is when you provide them with unfamiliar tools. This is actually one of the most exciting things about teaching at a community college. I introduce conceptual ideas in the world of psychology. I help to understand how those conceptual ideas can actually be used in pragmatic situations, such as hospitals, workplace, all of that stuff. However, I'm also loading up their utility belt with additional tools and concepts that at some future time, and admittedly sometimes in the context of assignments in my classes, those individuals can put those together in creative ways. So when they're looking at solving a particular problem in the workplace or at home or anything, they can say, hey, wait a minute, I've got more options now. I can it's like getting a whole new bag of Legos. And I'm going to be, I have all my old Legos. Here's a whole bunch of new Legos. I can build different things. And so that is the kind of the advantage of having that kind of education component embedded into programs like we teach at the college that I'm at. So just a really big part of how I perceive my work is that the information being applied to each one of these three. When we're dealing with adult learners in particular, they demand it, they want it. They want to have pragmatic and creative ways to use this information. Otherwise, don't waste my time. I'm busy. I got other things to do. Okay, and finally we have applications, and I kind of covered that a little bit. Applications of this is we use different aspects of our intelligence depending on what is demanded of us in the situation. This, to me, the whatever we've been bequeathed with, whatever we've been gifted with in terms of IQ, creativity, and our ability to have context, is our ability to adapt. Again, this goes back to like when I think about individuals and intelligence, the people that the factor that I focus the most on is adaptability to different situations. So someone who's, let's say, high in all three of these things can adapt themselves to academic, pragmatic, and creative situations. And that's where they'll be gravitating, that's where they'll excel, those kind of things. And interestingly enough, a lot of this stuff, if you point it out, can actually be trained, can actually be increased, provided the person has the right experiences and the right opportunity to see the pragmatic applications and the creative applications of what they're learning in school. So this there is a big part of the way I approach my teaching, the way I approach my role, and the way I interact with my students. So hope you enjoyed this. Look forward to the next video where we're going to take on the next multiple intelligence theory. In fact, it's called the multiple intelligence theory of Howard Gardner. And so until then, have a great, great day.